Part of leadership series. Today, I will be talking on Cialdini's six principles of influence. Influence: The Psychology of Persuasion, and the book is written by Robert Cialdini, who is a professor of marketing and psychology at Arizona State University. And I usually tell people that if they have not heard of this book, it is hands down one of the best books you can ever read about the topics of influence and persuasion. So, if you are really going to read just one book in your entire life about those topics, then this is the book to get. It has literally been on nearly every single national bestsellers list. It sold over 2 million copies and it has been translated to 20 plus languages. So it is a phenomenal book. And there is just to no way I could give a course about influence or persuasion without really referencing the studies in this book. So in this book, Cialdini has six principles of influence. That is the reference in separate chapters and talks in depth about why those principles work in terms of persuading people to get things done. And those principles are reciprocation, commitment and consistency, social proof, authority, liking, and scarcity. And in the rest of the presentation, I'm going to be talking about each one of those principles separately, giving an overview about what they mean and high-level example of how it applies in the real world, as well as a separate slide that talks about how you can take and use that principle and apply in a virtual team. Now, just as a side note, those examples are not going to be exhaustive in the sense that this is the only way you can use this principle in your virtual teams, but rather just to give you a flavor of how you can apply that principle to get things done. And your focus should be more on actual principles and the meeting behind it and how you can actually take it and apply it as opposed to just taking the examples that I am going to be providing. So let's start with the first principle, reciprocation. And what reciprocation means is that individuals have a tendency to return a favor. So if you are giving someone something of value, they are more likely to give you something back in the future. And an example of that, asking for donation in the mail by including a small gift such as personalized labels increases the chances that someone else will donate. And that actually happens a lot to me. I always get donation requests in the mail where there are either personalized labels or a nickel or dime included as a gift, and that actually entices me to give back. And it is not about being tricked or anything, but it is just the fact that you want to give to a good cause, and they increase the chances of donating back because of that little gift. So, what are some examples of how to use the reciprocation principle in virtual teams? One is to help a team member with something that is not typically part of your responsibility. So, if you go out of your way to help someone with a task that is not part of your day job, then they would really appreciate that and want to give you something back in return. Another is to send someone a token of appreciation as a gift. So a lot of employees actually have something called employee gift giving program where like you can send someone a mug with a company logo or a t-shirt or something like that as a note of praise or appreciation for their hard work. And by taking advantage of that, you are triggering the reciprocation principle for them to actually help you out in the future. And just to repeat the point I made earlier, the example I'm giving for each one of the principle are not exhaustive. So you can actually go back and look at the definition for each one of those principles and think of creative ways that you can apply them to your own teams. The second principle of is commitment and consistency, and what that means is that individuals have a deep desire to be consistent. So people will behave consistently with decisions and choice that they have already made even if the original incentives of the decisions have been removed. Now I know this might sound a little bit confusing. In fact, this principle, the commitment and consistency principle, is the most nebulous out of six, at least for me. So it is best explained in an example. So one example is a person who committed to wearing a cancer awareness button for a week ends up donating more money to fight cancer than someone who does not wear at all one at all. And that's because those who wore the button wanted to be consistent with their own internal actions of being cancer fighters. So this was a controlled study, and you can read more about in this Cialdini's book. Cialdini's book, but it is. mm, it was basically where they asked people to either wear a button or not wear at all. And then after a week, they asked that first group if they were willing to donate versus the control group that didn't wear a group button. And the first group ended up donating a lot more money because they wanted to be more consistent with their own internal actions. So here are some examples of how to use the commitment and consistency principle in a virtual team. One is to ask the team member to do a small request with a high probability of to acceptance before asking for larger related tasks down the line. So one thing I can think of is, let's say you want someone to on the team to handle the meeting requests and to schedule them for the next 3 months. And rather than asking them to do that initially, what you can do is ask them to schedule a single meeting for next week, let's say Thursday at 9 a.m. And then after they agree to do that and do it, you can basically follow up and say, why do not you do all the recurring meetings the next 2.5 months, and that's where the whole commitment and consistency principle actually kicks in. Another example is to ask for volunteer to complete the task instead of assigning it to them, and the task will have a higher chances of being completed because people want to be initiate internally consistent with the task that they commit to voluntarily. And we actually talked about this in the previous module where when you ask someone to volunteer, there is a higher chances of them actually wanting to get it done as opposed to you just assigning to them. The third principle is social proof, and what that means is that individuals tend to do what other people are doing. So people pursue what's called safety in numbers among other individuals, particularly when they are unsure about a decision. And an example of that is a person is more likely to put money in a tip jar if he sees that other people ahead of him have already put a tip. And that's actually the reason why a lot of the students should keep the tip jar in clear containers. And that's so that people can see how much money is in it there and get influenced into putting some money in there. So that's actually the reason why a lot of restaurants will keep that. So um, this is one of the example. So one is to get buy-in in on important decisions separately from the team members. before discussing them openly in a group. So let's say, for example, you have a meeting next week with 7 individuals, and there are major decisions that needs to be made, and you already have some thoughts and opinions on what the decision should be, and you also know that two of the three of the people in that group actually share the same thought and opinion that you do and want that decision to be made in your direction. What you want to do is to call those individuals separately and get the buy-in. Make sure that they are on board with a decision and ask them to back you up during the meeting. So when the meeting actually happens and you state the facts of what the decision should be, or you are sharing your thoughts and so on and so forth, you have sometime someone else who is going to back you up, and that creates some social proof that other members of the team actually do want some sort of buy-in on the decision, and that helps influence the overall decision. Another example is to reference best practices that are published by the well known standards and the framework, such as framework, which is the project management body of knowledge, or ITIL, infrastructure library, the social proof to push back on ineffective processes. So if someone is talking about wanting to do something in a certain way, and you know that the best practices do not really recommend that, you can always use PMBOK or ITIL or any standard and say, here is how the rest of the world does it. And I think that we should do just like everybody else does. The fourth principle is authority, and what that means is that individuals tend to obey someone with a higher degree of authority, and people usually get persuaded by individual in position of authority, such as uninformed personnel like cops or doctors. And the well-known statement here is that if an expert says it must be true, and an example here is the famous Milgram experiment at Stanford University, which shows that subjects were willing to give painful electric shocks to another person because they were instructed to do so by an individual with an authoritative role. And I am not going to go into the Milgram experiment here. You can definitely Google it or read more about it in the book, and it is a fascinating experiment. So here are some examples of how to use authority principle in virtual teams. One is to borrow authority from your own superior or from the team members' respective superiors. If you are working in a matrix organization, to stress the importance of certain tasks, so what you can do is to you can tell your team members that you have a discussion this project with their own bosses, and they are committed to getting this done. So in a way you are actually borrowing authority from their own bosses and say that now you are kind of accountable to get this done. Another is to set expectation within the team that you are ultimately accountable for the success of this project, and this is assigned authority. So you can basically set the expectations with your team saying, I am basically accountable for getting this done. So it is extremely important for everyone to do their job. In a way, it is kind of similar to the previous examples, but it does overlap with it. The fifth principle is liking, and what this means is simply individuals tends to be influenced by people that they like, and the people will more likely buy something from someone who is similar to them. So, for example, international organizations rely on local salesperson in different countries because they are more likely to sell to customers who share similar cultures, and that is a fact. And nearly every single international organization. And here are some examples of how to use the liking principle in virtual teams. One is to get to know your team members personally. Uh, uh, their likes, their dislikes, their families, their hobbies, and everything else you can know about them through informal discussions that you can possibly have. And by doing that, you actually get closer to them and get closer to knowing exactly what they like and dislike, and you want to focus on discussing any common similarities between you and them whenever you get the chance. So you can talk about any similar backgrounds, parental status, so they have children or you have children, or your favorite sports team. So really it is like just about getting someone to like you and share those common similarities between you and them. And the third quick example is that you can share articles, videos, events that you think your team member might be interested in. And I think this is very valuable in virtual teams. So whenever you know someone enjoys a certain hobby and you are reading something on CNN or your favorite news website, and you think that might be appealing to them, then sending them actually helps you develop their relationship with them and eventually have them like you. The last principle is scarcity, and what that means is that individuals, they tend to want their things more than their availability is limited, and people will demand more of something when it is scarce it's in supply. So that is a natural law of supply and demand in economics. For example, limited time offer in car dealership or a special offer or clearance item in stores actually result in an increase in sales because of the scarcity principle. And here are some examples of how to use the scarcity principle in virtual teams. One of it to use terms such as unique opportunity or once a lifetime event to entice team members into working on tasks that are highly visible. And I know this works a lot with me whenever I am in a project where one of the VP or directors actually really want me to work on it. That they actually use those words. They basically say this is a high impact project and make sure that you do the best job possible because it is going to give you great opportunity down the line. Another example is to stress time and constraints and deadlines as a way to highlight time scarcity as a factor. And we have talked about this a lot before. This is the idea behind actually setting deadlines. The time could be the scarcity factor here. So what are these summary actions of this video? Use one or more of Cialdini's six principles of influence to persuade your virtual teams to get things done. Use reciprocation, commitment, and consistency, social proof, authority, liking, and scarcity. And that's it. Thanks for watching.